in InRetroSpect.
Hello and welcome to the fourth and penultimate part of InRetroSpect here on InRetrospectPodcast.com. This series of 5 special shows has been dedicated to Rockstar's relationship with film, a silver screen that has inspired and flowed into more of its work than probably any other medium. It has been this cultural cohabitation that Rockstar has used to prove that games can be bedfellows with other media, and they've used it to their advantage to gain knowledge and become enthused. It has been this attitude to encapsulate movies directly into their portfolio that has given Rockstar an unrivaled reputation as a company that is using an established industry to push forward another. Now, if you've missed any of the previous podcasts in this series, which have looked at Rockstar titles such as L.A. Noire, Red Dead Redemption, and The Warriors, then they can all be found with our friends on iTunes, the Zoom Marketplace, or on our website, InRetrospectPodcast.com. At the end of the 20th century, Rockstar were yet to make a single game. A surprising fact that has largely been forgotten in the smudging of history and certainly in the shadow of their recent success. But it's surprising to think that before Smuggler's Run 2 and later Grand Theft Auto 3, which was due to hit the shelves in 2001, Rockstar had yet to make a single game, instead learning about the industry as publishers rather than diving straight into development. In these early years before Grand Theft Auto 3, arguably the game that started to cement the image of Rockstar, the company had already been responsible for throwing into gamers' hands titles such as Smuggler's Run, Midnight Club, Earthworm Jim 3D and Oni. During this time they courted controversy and pursued media delight, but they were yet to really drop themselves into the limelight, never wanting to start writing that all-important code until they'd found the right formula and had the right ideas for their first title. Through these series of specials and with the advantage of hindsight, we now know that, among other things, Rockstar used their love of film to drive through the development of each of their games. But this drive had to start somewhere, and for Rockstar it started as a publisher. In their almost 10-year history of publishing titles, it's not difficult to imagine that what Rockstar was looking for was to find that title that would bridge the gap between film and games. A game that would show them how to create new genres from old ones, and how to take a successful business and use it to their advantage. DMA's Grand Theft Auto was sprinkled with references to gangster violence and cinematic car chases, but it was hardly a vision that could be placed upon the silver screen. The game that I think changed everything was a title that was being made in Finland. It was taking its influences straight from Chinese cinema and would also use gameplay that would take players to experience things that they'd only seen and understood in films. This game was Max Payne. Developed by a reasonably small team over several years, Max Payne wears his influences on its sleeve. There is a brooding internal monologue of film noir, the gritty graphic novel cutscenes, the characters inspired by Norse mythology, and action lifted straight out of Hong Kong cinema. The team at Remedy Entertainment were happy to bring the best of what they knew and bring it together into one game, something that no doubt delighted the would-be developers at Rockstar. The release of Max Payne in 2001 not only marked the start of Rockstar's increasing involvement in the process as they began to turn from a game's publisher to a developer, but it also marks their starting participation from being an interested party to actually taking it upon themselves to port the game over to PlayStation 2 and the Xbox. The early signs that the project to them was to become more than a simple publishing deal. At this turn of the 21st century, we also saw a time when the films of John Woo were starting to gather more and more popularity in Western cinemas. Indeed, at this time, his work had received the highest vindication an Asian director could get in regards to the highly commercial market of America, as 1 year earlier he had chosen to direct the Hollywood movie Mission Impossible 2, a film that far surpassed both budget and scope of his previous titles. And it's somewhere around this point where the three paths of cinema, Remedy and Rockstar all converge, because despite Woo's recent success in the West, it was in fact his earlier work in Hong Kong, that had taken the eye of Remedy and indeed was responsible back then, I think, for attracting Rockstar to the project as a publisher. Well versed in the work of Woo, from the moment you strike up Max Payne and the opening bars of the piano score start playing out, the early influence of his early films are doing a slow motion roundhouse kick in your face. It almost feels a little too obvious when the greyed out difficulty selection Hard Boiled stares at you as you begin the game for the first time. One of John Woo's most celebrated works, Hard Boiled, like Max Payne, is a gloriously over-the-top and unashamedly explosive film that also has its tongue firmly set into its cheek. It's a film that manages to defy explanation. To try and convey to someone the logistical beauty of the final scene starring Chow Yun-fat, who is in a hospital rapping to a baby whilst he kills several goons, is a delightful challenge, but only seeing, or in this case hearing, is believing.
面對面乜你咁面善，睇真原來你係口水堅。我揸住你張氈，你話好肉酸。你要我抱咁耐，我話好自在。家陣大鑊，咪再頭惡惡，咪再頭惡惡。我知道難聽㗎啦，唔好詐我型啦，口水堅。
If you're a John Woo fan, then the echoes of this moment, and indeed this movie, stick in your mind from the very moment you turn on to play Max Payne. And it's not just the naming conventions of the different stages of difficulty where the similarities stick. There is also the lead protagonists, who are similarly both cops, whose careers turn sour down a darker path after their relationships with family and friends are torn apart. The lives of Max Payne and Tequila are not inexorably linked, but they both do bear the hallmarks of traditional noir characters. Though the game has strong correlations, specifically to Hard Boiled, the work of John Woo shines through the entire title. There are plenty of parallels with the stark action of Woo's early cinema and that of Max Payne, the accent on humour and personal struggles, all evident in Remedy's title and Hard Boiled, A Better Tomorrow, and even from his first roam into Western cinema, Hard Target. Amongst them all are characters with murky moral pasts and equally destructive personal relationships. Both the work of John Woo and Remedy contain modern anti-heroes and the neo-noir characters of our age. It's not only the central character of Max Payne that embodies these qualities, but the influences are spread across the whole setup. Often those who Max Payne is happily blasting apart are the most comical characters, portrayed as idiotic goons and mind-numbing buffoons, something that John Woo also has a tendency to exploit. Of course, this is not an atypical association, it's all iconic action fare, the bumbling miscreants flanked by a better prepared and eagerly skilled villain, and at the top of the pyramid the smartly dressed and well-spoken boss who pulls all of the strings. John Woo often plays with these relationships, but it's a hierarchy that once again gets mirrored in Max Payne. There's also the wounded rogue that Max has to chase down, which is similar to the end fight in Hard Boiled, though instead of a hospital, this takes place across the rooftops of New York City. Again, to anyone who's well acquainted to John Woo, this is all nothing new. John Woo hinges his films around these relationships, delighting in the conflict that it throws up, rather than trying to play on the intricate details that exist between them. Max Payne is much the same. There is a strong focus on Max Payne as a character, but as the game moves on, the focus becomes even more direct, that the problem will be solved with a final gunshot and not a cup of tea and crumpets. John Woo's characters, though, are a tad more compassionate than the one featured in Max Payne. You won't catch Max reciting rap music to a baby. However, Max might not have a soft side, but he is poetic. His words melt like snow on a discarded corpse in the noonday sun, and he's littered with more metaphor and allegory than a work of abstract fiction. They might be different characters, but they express themselves in similar ways. Hard Boil's tequila shows his compassion on his sleeve and is utterly ruthless in equal measure, whereas Max is utterly ruthless but hides his sympathy for the city and the situation under emphatic language and symbolic speech. Though complex, Max's words are tinged with pain and suffering, and though slight, there is a character here who has in some ways been left holding a baby. It wasn't until Rockstar came along that Remedy's use of bullet time, action and humour were going to be jailed to the PC. It's another interesting part in the history of the game and demonstrates Rockstar's eagerness to get on board with the project that this is a title that already had a publisher, with 3D Realms and Gathering of developers, who were due to release the title only on the PC. It wasn't until later on in the year that the game was released that Rockstar had taken the effort to port this game over to consoles. This was a decision that not only changed the demographic of the title, but also was a significant move by Rockstar in showing their enthusiasm for the game and their insight into the power of the consoles in delivering certain experiences. The use of the controller rather than a mouse and keyboard, I think, unlocks the potential of a game as a more unique cinematic experience that's not split between two types of input. Max Payne is a truly wonderful piece of drama, and its use of cinematic techniques do shine on the home consoles rather than the restrictions of the PC. There is something about playing Max Payne on a television screen rather than a monitor that does increase that sense that you're curling up to watch a gritty Hong Kong thriller rather than fiddling around with MS-DOS. Of course, without the brilliance of the title to work with it in the first place, none of this would be possible, and Remedy deserve the credit they got, and they do still receive. But it was Rockstar's passion for cinema and the strong filmic ties that Max Payne wore on its sleeve that, when they ported it over to consoles, gave the game a stronger audience, a larger presence, and took advantage of all that it had to make it a piece of interactive fiction. From a distance, it was clear that Rockstar needed to get involved with the publishing of Max Payne in some way. They might not have been part of the PC release, but taking on board the lucrative porting to the popular home consoles was an attractive move that a small team like Remedy could not refuse. After developing the game for nearly 5 years, the last thing they needed was to take their game and see it through all the pitfalls and traps that come with transposing a game from one format to another. You don't have to stretch much of your imagination to see why Rockstar wanted to publish Max Payne. Sure, the initial attraction was a strong influence and unique approach of Chinese cinema that ran through the title like a stick of rock, and Rockstar saw the console as a better home for this to shine. But Remedy has something more than that. They had the idea for a title that with the right direction could be a successful franchise, and maybe they didn't realise it at the time. With hindsight, it's easy now to see what Rockstar was planning, but part of porting and publishing the first game was a direct intention to take the series down the path that they wanted. It's probably a cynical point of view, but I believe that Rockstar saw these influences, the strong connection with John Woo's cinema, and knew that being involved with that process would help increase their portfolio and also help them move towards the creation of their first game and their ultimate goal of creating true gaming cinema. What Remedy have put into the game showed Rockstar first that cinematic games could work and influences could come from other directions and that viewpoints can change. You have to remember that it was during the time that Rockstar were jumping into bed with Remedy that they'd started work on GTA 3, their first major title. It was a gamble from Rockstar to publish Max Payne on the consoles, but it was the films that drove them, and Max Payne's development was probably a great inspiration to a way of working inspired by another medium. Though, however great the connection with the work of John Woo, there was another film, again inspired by Chinese cinema, that I think played a pivotal role in showing Rockstar why this game was something they wanted to be part of. Released a couple of years earlier, the distinctive green and grey palette of The Matrix delivered a visual experience that many had not seen in theatres before. Sure, John Woo was a master of slow motion to enhance depth and insight into sublime dances of action, but the Wachowski brothers brought this to a Western audience, who are only now ready to stand up and pay attention. The use of bullet time in The Matrix was its draw and its unique selling point, something that critics immediately pointed to, and something that gamers crave to be in control of. It's most likely that this was all part of the Remedy model for Max Payne long before The Matrix came along, but after the release and success of this movie, you can almost hear the discussion in the Rockstar offices that this studio in Finland was creating a game that had captured the cinematic brilliance of bullet time and the hyper-violence of John Woo and Chow Yun-fat. I might be over cynical, but again with hindsight you can see why Rockstar would be so interested in being part of this creation of the game, especially when they had their first title in development. Rockstar have such a strong relationship with film. It's what we've proven throughout these specials, but I believe it's a kinship that started with Max Payne. The Matrix provided a strong commercial pressure to get involved with the project, but the filmic brilliance of Max Payne is there for all to see. In some ways, Max Payne was fortunate that The Matrix came along when it did, so to make it marketable for Western audiences. But it's easy to see that even in the early stages of development, the shot of Max holding dual Berettas and leaping through fire is an iconic image that borrows so much from Hong Kong cinema of the time, and certainly that of John Woo's, and this is where the influences came from, and what Rockstar originally fell in love with.
Vinny got needy. Just the man I've been killing to see.
Payne? Freaking fed! I
knew from day one there was something screwy about you. What do you think you're doing? You're a freaking cop. You ain't got squat on us. You can't just come in here waving your piece like it meant something. Yeah! Oh, my God. Oh, God, you shot me. Ah! You're dead, Payne. What the hell are you waiting for, you apes? Kill him! Kill him!
With pleasure, boss.
Got me bailed. I made like cherry on fat.
All these parts, the similarities in character and direction and the embracing of Chinese cinema is what I think attracted Rockstar to get involved with the project. Looking back now at their involvement with the sequel Max Payne 2, Rockstar was still only publishing, but their studio in Vienna were getting more and more integral to its development, helping to fund part of the game's research and aiding to dramatically cut the creation time from almost 5 years down to 2. Remedy obviously loved their creation. I mean, lead writer Sam Lake was even the face of the original Max Payne. At the time of development of the third title, though, Remedy was busy creating Alan Wake, so development fell to Rockstar. Again, is it cynical for me to say that this is what Rockstar wanted all along? After all, we've seen evidence to back up this claim after a similar situation rose from Rockstar's interest in the works of Team Bondi and LA Noire, a game they have openly said they would like to add to their roster. The New York firm are shrewd business folk, and it's not doubtful for me to say that they publish games for a reason beyond helping out smaller studios. These two particular games are unique for their overt references to film, something that over these specials we've proved that Rockstar have a penchant for. Both of them have had something unique and something maybe Rockstar thought they could take advantage of and do better. Surely a team of Remedy's quality could have started development of Max Payne 3 on their own whilst developing Alan Wake. After all, there's almost been a decade in between Max Payne 2 and 3 and 2 years since Alan Wake was released. It's not clear why Rockstar took on the development though. There is a suggestion that Rockstar brought the rights to Max Payne from the Finnish company after they hit financial difficulties. So Rockstar was the heroic cinema hero that picked up the broken pieces and saved the day. If Rockstar had intended this all along, then they've done well to soften the blow to Remedy, that they now own something they created. In a recent interview with GameSpot, Remedy's Matthias Millerin said that in the later stages of the creation of Max Payne 3, Rockstar wanted the creators of the original title to put in their feedback. It was clear, though, that Rockstar had faith in Remedy and wanted to use that in order to further their own attempts to start making scintillating interactive fiction. Remedy showed Rockstar how influential films could be to the creation of a game, not only in terms of imaginatively, but also commercially. Without the brooding character of Max Payne, would have John Marston been so perfectly cast? Without the influence of John Woo, could Max in the third game still be as audacious as ever, but remain grounded with a smattering of unearthly compassion? Personally, I think that the studio always intended to play a bigger role in the development of Max Payne. They wanted to put their own Western mark on the cinema of John Woo and the dark noir that Remedy had started. But just like John Woo relies on the charisma of a slow-motion lead, kicking through a veil of doves to lead his visual signature and make him so recognisable, Rockstar wouldn't be where they are today without the image and verve of Remedy's Max Payne. Well, that's it from me and this episode of InRetroSpect. Next week I'll be back and joined by Pete, Chris and Dan for the final part of our special series looking at the work of Rockstar. To be the first to hear the final episode, then make sure you're following us on Twitter and InRetroSpect or subscribe on iTunes. Remember that InRetrospectPodcast.com is where you can find all the information on the folk that have taken part in this series of specials and the rest of our regular output from the label. That's also where you can catch up with any of the episodes that you've missed before you join us for the final part in 7 days' time. I've been Sam Turner, and this has been In Rockstar Spect.